First of all, I'd like to just say good evening, everybody. My name is Cheryl Randall. I'm the Climate Change Campaign Organizer at Ecology Ottawa. I'm very excited to be here with you this evening. And sorry if I get distracted, it's just because I'm letting more people in, that's all. While folks are coming in, I'll just say a few words of introduction. I'm looking forward to a really wonderful discussion on this topic. And the workshop is, as you will have just heard, going to be recorded. So if you miss any points in the introduction, you'll find that the main plenary session is available afterwards, not the conversation in the breakout rooms though. If you don't want to be recorded, feel free to turn your screen off, but otherwise we enjoy seeing your smiling faces. So I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on unsurrendered, unceded Algonquin territory, the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Even though we are all participating virtually, we're discussing this area in Ottawa, and it's where many of us, of course, call home, where we work and where we play. And organizations and individuals committed to the environment and justice, we are deeply grateful to Indigenous people who have been ongoingly stewarding this land since time immemorial. Just 1 second about Ecology Ottawa to give you a little bit of background if you aren't familiar with us already. We are a non-profit, very heavily volunteer-driven organization, and we know that Ottawa residents are concerned about the environment, and we want to make sure that residents have the information that they need to make good decisions about the local environment, and also to put pressure on Ottawa City Council where needed. I will just say that I see that there are several people from councillors' offices with us this evening, as well as Patrick Burke from the Glebe BIA. So he brings an interesting perspective to share. So welcome to everybody. We are part of the People's Official Plan. So we have worked with Walkable Ottawa in that capacity as well for a few years now. And as we now have a new official plan, we know that the city is looking at how our neighbourhoods are going to be developed over the next few years. So this conversation is very timely. I should just mention that both of our organisations are Walkable Ottawa and Ecology Ottawa are independent from the City of Ottawa, but we like to bring feedback into the city.
Fix my speaker.
Let me see if I can find out who that is.
That's Chris Penton.
Ah, Chris. Let me turn your microphone off for you. Great. Anyway, Walkable Ottawa is represented this evening by Rosalind Hill and Carolyn McKenzie and Madeline Eishert. And I'm very pleased to be working with all three of you this evening. The final thing I was going to say was that the reason we're having this discussion is to bring residents' comments back to the City of Ottawa. So please, we would love to not only have you join in the discussion, but also feel free to use the chat. We will be capturing all of your comments, and that will feed into the output from this workshop, which you will hear a little bit about later. Okay, so that's an introduction. Are we all happy to proceed? Any questions? Right. We'll just let Cassie in. Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to take another couple of minutes just to talk about the connection between walkability, the environment, as well as health objectives and social, here you see on the screen, and community. So Ecology Ottawa and Walkable Ottawa has run a number of workshops already, focusing on the different aspects that are needed to create walkable neighbourhoods, or 15-minute neighbourhoods. You may have heard the term. I recognise many of the faces in the participant list, so we will have seen some of you there, so welcome back. 15-minute neighborhood, if I refer to walkability, it's all bound up. If you can reach a destination within 15 minutes, whether that's walking or biking or skating or any form of active transportation or public transit, I'm talking about all of the same things there. So neighborhood walkability, we look at it from three levels, basically. The climate protection, making sure we have healthy residents, and then making healthier, more vibrant communities. On the climate side, you know that Ottawa has not escaped the changing climate or the warming climate that we've seen across the globe and across Canada, with flooding and tornadoes and the derecho earlier this year. At Ecology Ottawa, we believe that one of the best ways to combat urban sprawl is by creating walkable communities, where the neighborhood is walkable, we have less car dependency, more mobility options, and that means a lower carbon footprint. In terms of health, of course, as with other cities across the world, Ottawa has prioritized cars at the expense of pedestrians and cyclists over a number of decades now. And we still now see new communities being built where they're cut off from basic amenities and viable transit. And Ottawans need more choice in their transportation options so that it's easier for them to choose to be healthy, and sustainable transportation alternatives like active transportation and transit need to be offered. And so finally, looking in terms of making our neighborhoods more vibrant, if we make our city more walkable, we integrate housing with basic amenities, parks, schools, shopping areas, then we can create more bustling and dynamic neighborhoods, pushing back against this big box outlet, strip mall, the vast parking lots. These degrade our livability and damage our environment at the same time. So if we can push back on that, we can create more vibrant neighborhoods and strengthen the social fabric in our communities. Now, in terms of physically creating walkable neighborhoods, we need some infrastructure that makes walking enjoyable, as Rosalind loves to promote, enjoyable walking. So we need sidewalks, which need snow clearing in the winter, tree canopy for shade from the summer heat, benches for resting. And of course, the same assessment needs to be had for other alternative transportation like bike lanes, for example. And then as well as infrastructure, we need to think about destinations. We're talking about libraries, recreational facilities, green spaces, and one large aspect is looking at the range of local shops where we don't have to walk through a huge parking lot. Providing walkable shopping destinations can help residents to make these healthier transportation choices if we do it well. So this is what we will be discussing this evening, this critical piece of a puzzle in making walkable communities. Now I'm going to hand over to Rosalind. Sorry if I've been talking too long. And she is going to give you some background on the connection between walkability and infill, density, and financial sustainability.
Okay. So thanks, Cheryl. That was a fantastic introduction. So yeah, I did want to talk a little bit about infill because the relationship of walkable shopping destinations and intensification and infill housing, they're very tightly related. So infill housing is the idea that our existing neighborhoods could become more highly populated by small residential projects that are built throughout the neighborhood that are much more intense than the existing houses around them, so that it boosts up the number of people in the neighborhood. When we think about our existing walking shopping destinations, or our almost walking shopping destinations, or about neighborhoods where there's just no walking to shopping, one of the things we need to recognize is that we could try really, really hard to get walking shopping destinations booming in any of those locations. But if there aren't people to shop in those stores, it's just not going to work. So right now, our existing neighborhoods have enough shops. You know, obviously we are all feeding ourselves and finding somewhere to buy our nuts and bolts and toilet paper. So there are enough shops for all of us. And the period of time during which our neighborhoods become more intense and grow in population is a moment of opportunity. It's a moment at which the number of shoppers increases, and the potential for walkable shopping destinations to flourish is very real, because all of those new people will be looking for somewhere new to shop. And if we can make that the answer for them of where will I shop, walking shopping destination, then it will benefit everyone in the neighborhood, those who have lived there for a long time, as well as the newbies. So there's a very symbiotic relationship there between intensification and walkable shopping destinations. We also, I don't think, can meet our intensification targets for housing unless we make our neighborhoods walkable. Because though we can fit in lots of new homes, we can't really fit in a whole ton of new cars. We really need lots of new people coming and not driving all over the place. So we really want our neighborhoods to transition, and we're going to need those small shops to make it a reality. So housing is critical to walking shopping destinations. Our new official plan is all about walkable neighborhoods, which is fantastic. But our new official plan doesn't have a clear plan for walking shopping destinations, and that's why Walkable Ottawa is focusing on this issue for this fall session, because it's important and it can't be left out. And we know that our past advocacy has had quite an effect at the city. So many of the things we've advocated for have made it into the official plan and become policy. So we want to push hard to get this one in as well. I think I'll leave it there and pass back to Carolyn.
Yep. Thanks, Rosalind. Great. Thanks, everyone, and welcome. My name is Carolyn McKenzie, and I'm with Walkable Ottawa as well. I call myself a Walkable Ottawa collaborator. We're all volunteers here. So I'm going to just take a few moments to talk about the visual preference survey that I imagine that many, if not most or all of you, took the time to complete and to think about. So thank you very much to everyone who did do that already. I think we have about 130 responses back to the survey at this point, so that's great. So just it's not meant to be a scientific survey. We're not talking about statistical significance here on any of the slides, but it really the objective of the survey was really to get people thinking about the whole sort of range, and this is not meant to be an absolutely complete and comprehensive necessarily, but I think it touches on the main elements of a walkable shopping destination. I should also say, we say walkable shopping destination, but it's not just about shops, retail, although that is a big part of it clearly, but it could also be services being provided, again, to meet your sort of local day-to-day needs. So with that, I'll just get you to advance to the next slide. There, just a few initial observations. This first slide is really just to give a bit of information as to who completed the survey. Most of you, I'd say about 3/4 of the respondents indicated that yes, you actually identify as living in a neighborhood that has an existing walkable shopping destination. So that's great if you're already somewhere where there is one. In terms of the predominant age group was 56 to 70, which is not necessarily hugely surprising. We got about 1/3 from that age group. Always like to hear from this group. I'm not quite in that group, but I'm pretty darn close. But always like to hear, and I'm always trying to, in these sort of, I'll say sort of community activities, always trying to get into the so-called younger demographic as well. So that 19 to 40, we did actually, it looks about 20, like we have about 25% response in that group, but always trying to figure out how to bring in that group as well. So we'll keep at that. Most of you indicated walking as a primary mode of transportation, so that's great. And that's, anyway, just gives you a bit of an idea of who's here today. Next slide. So you'll notice with the, what we did is we threw a whole bunch of images into the survey. And then we asked you to give us a sense of how they made you feel, in effect. And there were four elements. The first one is happiness. So the images that you see here correspond to the highest ranked images in the survey based on what they elicited in terms of happiness. So these made you most happy, in effect. And what's very obvious from these slides, obviously, is the amount of green trees in particular that makes people happy over all the other images that we threw. And I think we had about 36 images there. So that's interesting, reinforces some thinking about research and successful neighborhood elements. Next slide. Safety. Here are 3 images that came out on top as well. Always, there are a lot of things going on in these images, obviously. So I can't look at one of these images and say, well, clearly it was the, on the left-hand side, the bike lane, fairly protected bike lane. So I can imagine what was driving that high level of feeling of safety. But again, this is not scientific, but we'll try to get at some of these issues though in the discussion that's going to follow this evening. But sort of in the middle image, kind of a low-key shopping destination, very kind of some informal things going on there in terms of seating. No big barriers around, lots of decent amount of room on the sidewalk. That might be part of it as well. The image on the right-hand side, some cars for sure, but not very busy. That may be, when I looked at that, I thought that might be driving part of the sense of safety there. Next slide. Excitement, again, 3 of those relate to green. So people are made happy by green and by trees and plantings around, nice plantings around trees. That's a big driver of the sort of feeling of excitement and delight, as we like to say, in terms of walkability. Next slide. And welcomeness. Interesting that these images, and we sort of talked about this amongst ourselves before tonight. Sort of a common theme there was sort of a bit of a heritage feel to that. And not to say that heritage walkable shopping destinations are the only ones that are going to be successful, but there was a certain scale perhaps to that, and a certain, I'll say almost like quirkiness. There's not a lot of uniformity. There's a lot of variation in those facades, which makes it interesting and welcoming. Again, nothing too formal and austere. You can imagine walking down the street and having lots of interesting things to look at, and I think all of those things kind of combine to make people feel welcome. Next slide. The last one, the last 4 questions of the survey dealt with transitional steps. Interestingly, again, the pop-up play structure and the vegetable stand, so the 2 images at the top there, were most highly rated as far as elements that could help bring along a walkable shopping destination in a neighborhood that doesn't have anything right now. So those are sort of things that could be could potentially be established relatively easily. No buildings to set up, that sort of thing. And then the pop-up cafe and the temporary food truck were a little more moderate, I suppose. And again, we'll hopefully get into some of the thinking about what would need to be done to tweak those to make them more amenable, or if there were concerns about those, or what have you. Next slide. Yeah, so I'm now just going to, so moving along from the survey, I just wanted to talk briefly about 3 scenarios, and these are walkable shopping destination scenarios, and I'm going to describe them. They're fairly straightforward, but I'll just take a moment to describe them. And they're important because after, in just a few minutes, we're going to send everybody out to breakout rooms, and they'll be in one of 3 breakout rooms, and Madeline is going to explain how the core of the workshop is going to work in just a minute. But you'll land in one of 3 breakout rooms, and each one will be focusing on brand new walkable shopping destination challenges and solutions. Then another one will be focusing on what we refer to as nascent. So maybe where there's a little bit of activity, there's maybe a small shop, there's maybe a pop-up place of some sort that's attracting people in the community, and then existing walkable shopping destinations. So we're going to have 3 breakout rooms to follow, and one for each of those scenarios, and we'll be asking people in those breakout rooms to focus on those. So I'll just give you a few examples very quickly. Next slide. So the first one, brand new, Marty Carr, thank you very much for being here, Councillor Carr. I should say for being here this evening from and representing Alta Vista in your ward. These are just a couple of shots from Google Map. Based on basically a neighborhood that in this part of the neighborhood anyway does not have a walkable shopping destination. So we would be looking at a brand new scenario there. And I picked up, sorry, just go back for a second. The top image is Kilbourne, which has been identified as a minor corridor in the city's official plan. So there are implications for rezoning that may facilitate something there. The second is a church where there's obviously there's a signage there. You can't read it, but it's about a vegetable stand, and I believe there's a farmer's market in that area as well that's gaining some real headway there. So, but that's the brand new. That's an example of a brand new scenario. Next one is a nascent scenario. The top image is Stittsville Main Street. You can see there's a brand new mixed-use development on the right-hand side of that street. There are some shops. There are also houses mixed in. So there is something going on in that particular southern end of Stittsville Main Street, but it looks like it needs a bit of a push. The middle image is of Maryville Road. Again, kind of a big wide road, some commercial mixed in with quite a bit of housing as well. And then the last image on the bottom is in Britannia Village, and there's a very successful, it seems, ice cream shop on the right hand side, and that building that looks new, it's actually been completed, but there's a bakery, I believe, on the left hand side, and it's really become a gathering point. So, you know, what is there more that can be done there to really perhaps push that into more of a shopping destination? And the last slide. Examples of existing, and these are a bit more obvious, Beechwood Avenue, New Edinburgh, and Bank Street in the Glebe. Just a couple of images there are obvious, you know, shopping main streets. So I think that's it. I'm going to pass it over to Madeline now, who's going to walk us through the sort of instructions for the core of the workshop.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. So basically the workshop that we're going to be doing, as Carolyn said, we're going to divide you each into one of the 3 different categories. You won't have to pick, we're just going to send you off. And the first 10 minutes of the session is just going to be a brainstorming session. So everybody can just participate right in the chat or out loud, because I think there's only about 10 people per group, so it won't be too overwhelming. And I'll have a sheet up, and so I'll be facilitating one of the groups, and then Carolyn and Rosalind will as well. And so for the first 10 minutes, people will just be brainstorming ideas of what the challenges are currently in those neighborhoods. After the 10 minutes, we're gonna go back over all the ones that we've written out, and for 5 minutes, we're gonna try to narrow down to about 3 or 4 of the most pressing issues that we want to address for part 3, which will be a 20-minute discussion or brainstorming session on solutions that we can come up with together. So it will be facilitated by people, but you know, it's a chance for you guys to give your ideas and, you know, get the community involved in trying to find some solutions. Once all the 3 groups are done, we're going to come back into this main Zoom call, and then each facilitator from the group is going to spend about 5 minutes discussing, you know, what was said in the chat, and explaining what the 3 or 4 issues were and the solutions that we have. All of the comments and stuff in the main chat are going to be recorded so that we can go back to them. We won't necessarily have time to take suggestions from other group members from different groups on, you know, if you're in the nascent and you have a comment on the brand new, Please feel free to write them in the chat. We'll look over them afterwards. But just for timing purposes, I don't think we'll be able to take too many questions. And it's also being recorded, so there's that. But if you guys have any questions, please, feel free to ask us. It shouldn't be too complicated. There's no wrong answers. Just think and use your creative skills and we'll come up with some interesting solutions. So I'll pass it off back to Carolyn, I guess, or to Cheryl.
Cheryl, I think, yeah.
Great. I am going to open our breakout rooms. Just welcome back, everybody. I think we have everybody here. So Carolyn, I'm going to hand over to you. Except Carolyn is apparently not here. So obviously it's not true that everybody's here. Oh, there she is.
Carolyn, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
I was in the group that when we were looking at existing walkable shopping destinations. Boy, that the time sure sped by very quickly. We have a whole list of challenges, but in the discussion of the challenges, I think we had the kernel of some solutions, to be sure, but we didn't get on to many solutions. Maybe that was my bad facilitation of the group. But I'm going to go through. We did have a look at. I think I have about 10. Can you see my shared screen at this point? Yeah, okay. So the challenges, just going from the top, I think one of the important ones is the challenges with how buildings, I called it how they land on the street. So again, what's happening at grade, and there was discussion of the height of that first floor ceiling, reflective glass being used as opposed to using glass where you can see right into and what all the interesting things that might be behind the glass in the shop. Basically, urban design, better urban design, and better care of what that ground level looks like, making sure that it's interesting and human scale. That's a big challenge, and I think particularly where we have new buildings going in and redevelopment, making sure a lot of time the focus of a discussion can be on the height of those buildings, and what gets lost in the shuffle is that ground level and the detail and the care that needs to go into making sure that that's really interesting and has lots of appeal. Number 2, I think, was the discussion on existing walkable main streets was shopping destinations, was how busy some of those streets are becoming, that they're in effect, throughways or thoroughfares. They're congested, they're crowded, and the crowding can be exacerbated by number 3, which is the narrowness of sidewalks. And I think that's a big part of, if you don't feel safe on a sidewalk because of congestion, or perhaps you don't want your kids to be going to a street where it's too busy, there are lots of cars racing through in a narrow sidewalk. I think those things all play a role. We had a bit of discussion about parking, just provision of parking, certainly free parking, providing incentives for people to drive to some of those shopping destinations. And then the last one, and then I think I'll leave it there and go to another group, was just the convenience or lack of convenience of transporting larger items, even groceries in some cases. But some, and I'm thinking sort of shopping destinations that have, say, hardware stores where there may be heavier, larger items. So we need to think possibly, and there was mention of creating services to provide delivery services to get things to people's homes. They could walk to the store, see what they need, and then delivery services to get things home. I think maybe I will leave it there. We had a few more just talking about the long strips of shops, very long linear corridors, not so great. Certainly the cost and the relative, and I guess smaller shops being able to compete with larger, larger big box stores. And trees are a big issue, and that certainly came out in the survey as well. So we need more trees and finding space on streets for trees. So I think that's where we got to in with the existing.
I'll continue with the nascent neighborhoods. Just going to share my screen.
Just while Madeline's doing that, just to remind people to please feel free to throw things in the chat. If you have comments or reflections on what's being said or anything that's been talked about in the other groups, different views, just feel free to aggressively throw things in the chat.
Yes, for sure. We're going to be going over all of it. So the more comments, the better. A lot of what we talked about was kind of how do we transition in a way that feels, attainable for everybody and isn't too overwhelming, especially in nascent neighborhoods where, there's a lot of NIMBYism and maybe some more like reserved kind of ideas of how the neighborhood framework would change and how do we, go about addressing those issues. So kind of the main things that we came up with that we focused on for solutions was safety and accessibility, habituation, and like how to go around a little bit of NIMBYism that happens here, and then also just the density and population issue and how we need to have more people in these areas in order to increase people shopping and whatnot. The density and population, we didn't get to as much, but I think it's kind of a straightforward, build a more diverse landscape of homes, from multi-generational to single family to, even single unit dwellings, just to have more people, more diverse cast of characters. And then having shops that kind of, accommodate the needs of those people. In terms of safety and accessibility, this idea of complete streets, how do we, make sidewalks actually walkable, through plowing, in the winter, it's sometimes you can't even walk on the street. So encouraging the city to make sure that there's room for that. Having enough room on the sidewalk for people to walk, in multiple directions at once and not have to go into the bike lane, which then causes more issues. So having designated bike lanes was a solution that we came up with. And then we came on the topic of car parking, and kind of, there's this idea of transitional parking that I think most of us are familiar with, but I think it's important, especially in this context, to have access to parking. And I think a lot of what the group members were saying is, until everybody's fully, outside of their habit of, going to the grocery store once a week and buying a bunch of stuff and then coming home and not having to schlep 12 grocery bags or whatever, we need to have spaces for cars to park. And so it's kind of this idea of transitional parking, but incentivizing people to park a little bit further away, instead of, right on the street, and then making it paid. So it disincentivizes people to drive. And then in that same vein, having transit access and things like that. So yeah, I think that's kind of what we covered. And we got cut off, so I just wanted to thank the members of my group for participating. I appreciated all of the feedback.
All right, so I'll take it from there and share our document. So zoom out a little here. I think one of the interesting things at the beginning of our conversation was acknowledging that in a neighborhood that doesn't have a walking shopping destination, the future location of that walking shopping destination might not necessarily be on a quiet residential street or even on an existing busier traffic street, there are examples like in Britannia where it could be near a transit stop, if it was done properly, in a grayfield development. So a big empty space that used to be something else. So it's kind of interesting to think about all the different ways in which, or kinds of locations in which it could work. Then we talked quite a bit about the kinds of things that would need to happen to make sure that the walk to that location and in that location was really nice. So we had quite a list there in the red of the different things that would make that walking destination nice. And so as not to repeat what others have said, we would also add in benches, slower traffic locations, public toilets, or roads that have been put on a diet in the sense that they've got reduced speeds or narrower pavement for vehicles, that kind of thing. Complete streets. And then if it's a location that's becoming a walking shopping destination and is receiving new tower development, then making sure that the bottom of the tower or the podium is set up such that it's keeping the scale of a shopping street and getting the sun shadow effect of the tower far enough back so that it doesn't affect the quality of life on the shopping street. And then in blue, we had a topic which was about community consultation and the role of the community in providing input about a new walkable shopping destination, locations, things of particular value to a community that shouldn't get wrecked along the way, transparency in the way that these places are planned and the way that planning and discussions unfold. And having the city driving the bus, so to speak, rather than things just happening or development proposals just coming in and getting built. And then in the green section, we were talking about topics about related to sort of how do we choose that future destination. And there were some kind of cool ideas that came up. Like, for example, looking at the city's plan for which streets are going to get upgraded to become complete streets and focusing efforts on those. Because of course, if the city hasn't earmarked a place for any upgrades for, now to kingdom come, it can be very hard to get that transition to happen. So that seems like some low-hanging fruit there. And then looking for existing traces that give us hints about where it would be appropriate in a neighborhood, maybe because there used to be a store there or there's something in the underlying zoning. And targeting perhaps neighborhoods where people just do walk more by virtue of need. So neighborhoods where people can't afford cars might be some low-hanging fruit for a nice transition to being fully walkable, because you already have some foot traffic to depend on. So I think I'm up on the agenda now. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yep.
To kind of tie things together a bit. So we really appreciate all of the input and ideas that have been shared tonight. We hope that this can be an example to the city of the kinds of conversations that really need to be happening about our walking shopping destinations, and that we can be using the information from this brainstorm, and also any insights from texts, emails that you send, the chat that's gone on a little bit throughout the meeting, to advocate effectively to get the city to shift their some of their policy to really make space for this work that we feel really needs to happen. So thanks everybody for that. And we hope that we can really pull those pieces together in a way that is helpful for the city, but also for all of us to continue to advocate for this in our own ways. So we're going to be sending you information, our summary reports, and some advocacy summaries that come out of this work that we've done together. And we are looking for lots of opportunities to keep the conversation going. Carolyn or Cheryl?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll
no,
hand straight to Carolyn.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks. Yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate thanks and thank everyone for coming out tonight to be part of the discussion. I feel like we could have spent a lot more time getting into a lot more of the details, but as Rosalind said, I think this is hopefully an ongoing conversation. You know, one of the things that we're hoping is that people who are interested in this subject will be going back to their own communities, talking amongst their community members, talking to their neighborhood groups or community associations. And if there's interest, and going back to Karen, you're the first part of this conversation tonight. If there's interest, Walkable Ottawa and Ecology, we'd be very interested in getting into more of a deeper dive into a specific neighborhood and being part of that conversation, just helping to facilitate those sort of conversations. So if that's of interest, we'd encourage everyone to talk to their talk to your neighbors, talk to your community associations, and let's see where we can get. Because as Rosalind said at the outset, lots of good policy in the official plan, but also a lot of a fair bit of wishful thinking, I guess, from our perspective as to the whole idea of 15-minute neighborhoods, particular to this notion of being able to walk out to meet your daily needs, to destinations, not just being in neighborhoods where it's a nice place to go for a walk, but actually having destinations that can meet maybe not all of your needs, but the more that we're able to get out of our cars and to walk to those. So, but again, I think, as I said earlier, I think that needs that sort of planning. Very difficult to do well, I think, within the planning department at the city. We really feel strongly that it's a matter of working with communities, with residents, and developing sort of bespoke, tailored plans, neighborhood level plans that reflect the local context. So thank you. And I guess one last thing I would like to say was that we've had in the last few months, we've had some generous donations come our way. And it's helped us to make this sort of work possible. As I said, we're largely volunteers, but we were able, through some nice donations, to hire Madeline, who's a third-year Carleton student, who's been really fantastic in supporting this work. And that's it's really appreciated. So if you feel so inclined, we appreciate the support. So thank you, and thanks to everyone for your time tonight.
And Carolyn, how can people contribute?
Yeah, we have. If you go to the Walkable Ottawa website, there's a very well placed donate button on our site. So anyway, thanks again.
And thanks to Ecology Ottawa for working on this with us. It's good.
Yeah.
We love working with you. Have a great evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for all the comments.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.